What's the number one burning question aspiring aviators ask? It's sometimes not the right question, but it's inevitably, how long till I'm rich? Stick around as we take a closer look at how to make the most cheddar in today's aviation market. Specifically, we will compete the three most popular pathways: civilian trained in a Part 61 flight school, civilian trained in a Part 141 flight school, and finally, a military aviator trained in one of the branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. Which one will win? Stick around, you might just be surprised. My name is Jared Wood, and I'll be your host for today's episode. At Beyond the Hood, we like to examine all the different flight levels of what a career in aviation looks like. In today's episode, we take a closer look at how long you can expect to work in a career in aviation until you make $1 million. Notice I didn't say until you become a millionaire, because that would require me to know how much you save, invest, spend, etc. But rather, let's take a peek under the fiscal covers of a career in aviation and see how that elusive million is made. And then stick around to the end to see if you're close to being on glide path. I'll break this video down into the following sections. We'll talk about some methodology and assumptions. We'll talk about some exclusions. Can't include everything. We'll dive deep into civilian Part 61, followed by Part 141. We'll take a look at the military pathways. And then at the end of the video, we'll also have some takeaways that we'll discuss in terms of the results that we found and any surprises along the way. Without further ado, let's move into the methodology and the assumptions. All right, so for the first part of this video, we're going to take a look at some Part 61 assumptions. Now, if you're watching this video and you have no idea what Part 61 is, well, I could certainly tell you to go look it up on Google, or we could just have a quick sidebar here. So Part 61, that's going to be the training methodology that a lot of people get introduced to aviation. So you go down to your local airport, you find the fixed base operator or FBO, and they offer flight training. There's instructors there. You sign up for lessons. You typically sign up for an intro flight, and then you can piece together your training throughout your private pilots, instrument, commercial, etc. And there's typically not as much structure. You're taking these lessons when it works for you. The continuity of training is really up to you. So if you want to fly more or less, it's really up to you. Part 61 is probably the most common way that folks get into aviation, but we'll talk a little bit more about the rest of them as we go along. So for Part 61 assumptions, I tried to standardize the numbers used. And when I say numbers, I mean like the cost of the airplanes, the cost of the instruction, the amount of hours taken to get to certain ratings. So in this case, I decided to use the metro area of Seattle, Washington as my basis for all the Part 61 training costs. In terms of how does that compare or contrast to where you're at, I would just encourage you to take a look at the rates I used, go down to your local FBO and see what their rates are. Obviously, Seattle, big metro area, cost of living is a little bit higher, so your mileage may definitely vary on this one. But that being said, all the hourly rates of rental and instruction costs are based on a prominent and highly regarded local FBO. They've been around for a long time. They have a lot of planes. They're pretty well regarded within the community. I went with middle-of-the-road equipment. So in other words, if there were 10 different planes, like 10 different 162s, I didn't choose the newest plane. I didn't choose the oldest plane. I chose one right in the middle of the range. In terms of hours required to achieve the various licenses and ratings, I skewed my numbers to reflect data closer to the national average versus the bare minimum. So once again, your mileage may certainly vary. That being said, as an example, I used 55 hours of instruction and 60 total hours of aircraft rental. And we all know that you can probably get your license in 40 hours if everything goes perfect. You're an amazing pilot. You don't have breaks in training, etc. So that being said, once again, that's my assumptions. That's my methodology. You can certainly have different experiences with the Part 61 training. That being said, each individual is going to have definitely a unique path in this endeavor. Some are going to lead less hours, more hours, etc. I went through and looked through my old logbook, and I think it took me about 50 hours to get my private pilot's license when I was in college. And that was over about a 3 or 4 month period. I was fairly well invested in continuity and using the same instructors. So once again, your mileage may definitely vary. In terms of the Part 141 assumptions, now 141 is going to be a more structured school. That's going to be a school that, in this case, I used a 141 assumption that you're going to go to one of these nationally prominent 0 hours to CFI training programs. So what I did was I looked up on the website, figured out how much they cost, took a national average, and in this case, I kind of went with the top end. Now, could you find a $15,000, $20,000 swing in these numbers? Certainly, but it's what I went with. Also, for the location of training, I chose to go with a location that has very favorable flying environments. So like California, Texas, Arizona, Florida, those types of places where you can fly year round and has typically a better air mass than, let's say, the Northwest, where the winters can be not so conducive for flying. I also went with about a 12-month time frame to go from 0 hours to CFI with one of these Part 141 schools. I know you can do it less, and you can certainly do it more, especially if you start doing 141 schools that have degrees or credit hours tied in with them. Moving on, for the CFI assumptions. So this is talking about, what did I assume as far as CFI time and pay. So for the CFI rates, I used a local average for the Seattle Metro. This can definitely be much higher or probably not much lower on the national average. This research involved me talking to local CFIs to kind of get the feel of how many hours they're flying, what the pay rates are, etc. If you're, a private instructor with your own plane, maybe you charge a little more in that regard. So when you see the numbers that I throw out there, that's the assumptions there. But I did decide to come up with a number of about $35,000 a year for the CFI pay. Certainly, your miles may vary on that front. Some regional assumptions, right? So we're talking regional pay and credit hours. So what I did here is I took a look at an upper tier carrier with a shade above the guarantee for your yearly hours. So if you know ahead of time what regional you're going to fly for, you can tweak these numbers based on the guarantee, the expected flight hours, and the pay rates. There's a bunch of really good information out there on websites about the pay, the most recent pay. So I encourage you to go out there, take a look. If you have any questions about what those websites are, you can leave a comment below and I'll try and answer those as they come in. For anyone completely in the dark about guaranteed and credit hours, let's take another quick sidebar. Every carrier is going to have a different amount of guaranteed flight hours per month. This is all defined in a company's collective bargaining agreement, and it aims to keep pilots in line with any federal regulations in place for maximum hours worked and other factors. So it's definitely possible to get more hours in a month, but you usually won't get less than the guarantee. More hours worked means obviously more money in your paycheck. For major carriers, for the major carrier assumptions, I used, I'll come out right out. I'll use Delta pay scales. I used a mix of narrow body Boeing and Airbus equipment that is likely to be assigned to relatively new hires in 2024. Lots of ways to go with this in terms of what legacy or major carrier you're going to talk about. I went with Delta. Your mileage may definitely vary. I encourage you once again, take a look at the pay rates, see where you might lie. In terms of the pay contribution for 401k, I use 16%. This number could be a little bit lower. I don't think it's going to be much higher. The industry standard is probably somewhere in that 12 to 16% range, and that's a 16% contribution. Timelines. For the civilian progression, you'll notice that I have some different timelines associated with how long it takes to upgrade to captain and first officer, etc. I use those as kind of current averages for 2024. These could certainly be shorter, possibly longer, as we've seen over the last 25 years. These upgrades can change at the blink of an eye. So what I say now in 6, 12, 18 months could be completely different. But that being said, I do think that our current outlook for the airline industry is definitely trending towards remaining fairly intact for the foreseeable future. But you never know when another 9/11 or COVID or some type of event comes along. Lastly, we'll talk a little bit about military assumptions. So in this video, I used an Air Force active duty officer and pilot who's flying, in this case, a C-17. So I promise I'm not going to use C-17 examples in every one of my videos, but there's a rationale here. That being, I did use the Seattle metro area for the Part 61 and Part 141 baselines. Actually, just mostly for the Part 61 correction there. So I wanted to use a military example that was close to the Seattle metro area so I could kind of compare the different standards of living, cost of living. McChord Air Force Base obviously has C-17s just down the road from SeaTac, or Seattle, I should say. So it was a nice setup in terms of being able to compare that. Albeit that's where you're only going to be for a few years, so the mileage is definitely going to vary, but I ended up using that. In terms of salary, the military has definitely a bit of a complex pay structure. I went ahead and included all the various pays and allowances a pilot would receive every month, and this is composed of a basic allowance for housing, basic allowance for subsistence, base pay, flight pay, and then also the 401k retirement contribution, otherwise known as the blended retirement system. I use the standard 1% years 1 and 2, and then 5% through years 3 and on. I also factored basically an on-time advancement of rank and aircraft position for each of the assignments listed. For this example, I used a timeline of going to undergraduate flying training at Vance Air Force Base, Oklahoma, a year of training after that at Altus Air Force Base, Oklahoma, and then I used a 3-year assignment at McChord, followed by a 3-year assignment at McGuire, so basically metro area to metro area, and then the last assignment would be like a schoolhouse instructor at Altus Air Force Base, possibly staff. I mean, it really, honestly, the locations don't matter too much. I mean, it does affect the housing allowance, but the pay and everything shouldn't change. And also, you could very well sub in a naval aviator, a Marine, Army. You could pretty much sub in any officer for this because the pay rates aren't going to be significantly different except for the housing allowance. In terms of exclusions, I did leave out a few pathways on the way to making $1 million. So most notably, I didn't include the Air Force Reserve option. And while I love this option and should by all accounts include it as it's something that Beyond the HUD provides a service for, it's just too layered and nuanced to trying to accurately capture here. If that's something that you really want to learn about, head on over to our website and get a hold of us, beyondthehud.com. Happy to give you vectors for that career pathway and the Air Force Reserve. I also excluded other pathways that didn't involve the traditional CFI to regional jet to major carrier. I had to draw the line in the sky somewhere, and so this is where I came up with. So anyways, I'd love to hear in the comments below how you got to where you're at and what you think of the information here. So without further ado, let's take a look at how to make $1 million in a career in aviation. So the first thing we're going to look at is the civilian Part 61. So as you can see from the graph listed there, we have a couple years as a student. So year 1 student, I figured it's going to cost about $31,000 per year. So the national average of about $62,000 is a number I came up with once again using the local numbers from the Seattle metro area and the aircraft information and rental rates. I'll put that information up on the slides as well. So that's 2 years basically being a full-time student. Well, not full-time, but that's flying, at a rate that's probably near the national average. And we're going here from 0 hours all the way to CFI. So probably going to take you about 2 years. After you become a CFI, I figured that, like I said earlier, you're making about $35,000 a year. You're going to be doing that for probably 2 years to get your hours up. And once again, widely varied based on how much you're flying, what your FBO is, what the weather's like, where you're at, a whole multitude of factors, right? But that being said, let's say after 2 years of being a CFI, you're able to get hired at a regional jet. You spend 2 years as a regional jet. You upgrade that last year. Now you're a captain. And then on year 8, you end up going to a legacy. And year 9 and year 10, you're at the legacy. And then here we go. At year 11 in February, you hit that $1 million mark. And you can see the total compensation on the right. is based on 401k. It's based on, like I said, the pay rates for the different regionals and majors that I listed earlier. So not too bad, right? It takes you a little over 10 years to hit that million. Now let's move on to the 141 numbers. So I'll throw that slide up here now. So in terms of the 141 numbers, a little bit different, right? So year one, you're going to be a student. And I put that number at 109,000. Once again, kind of a national average, but certainly you could probably find less. And that's to get you from 0 hours all the way to your CFI. And then you're going to spend a couple years as a CFI. I use the same baselines as I did on the Part 61. So 35,000 a year. Take about 2 years. And then you're going to go to the RJ route, regional jet. You're going to be an FO for a couple years. Then you're going to be a captain. And then you're going to hit the legacy at year 7, 8, 9. And then at year 10, in April, you're going to hit that $1 million. So 9 full years plus 4 months. If we go back and look at the 61, it took 10 full years and 2 months. So, and the lead right now is the civilian Part 141. Finally, we'll take a look at the military pathway. So this one, no surprises here. Definitely the longest to become a millionaire. As I mentioned earlier, we have those assumptions. So year one, you're going to be a student. Year two, you're probably still going to be a student for the most part. Every aircraft is a little bit different on the timeline. Some of the heavies take 3-4 months. Some of the fighters significantly longer. So about 2 years is what I factored in there. And then you're going to have a slew of assignments. And you can see how the different pays and allowances and salaries and 401k comps, or contributions, contribute to that total compensation. And you're going to be moving around. You're going to be going from metropolitan areas to not so metropolitan areas, and that's going to affect your housing allowance. So at the end of the day, it's going to take you a little over 11 years and 8 months to hit that $1 million. Surprises? Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think it makes sense. It was interesting for me to put all the numbers down on paper and to figure out exactly how much time it's going to take. In terms of the takeaways, three big takeaways I thought from this information. One, for the Part 141, while it's a considerably more expensive option for training, it does end up getting you your ratings quicker, and consequently, you start earning positive cash flow as an aviation professional. Now, if you don't already have a degree, this could be problematic for your fallback and overall competitiveness in a down hiring market, but that's a whole other video for a whole other time. Now, second takeaway, for Part 61, it's second in the books in terms of how long it takes, but really only by 10 months. Could this be negated by holding down a full-time job and getting your hours on the side? Possibly, but really that's only for you to decide. The military route certainly is going to leave you a couple years, 1 to 2 years behind your peers that went to the Part 61, Part 141 when it comes to making that first million. That said, the type of flying and experiences you gain will be, well, they're going to be priceless. So can't really put a price on the experiences you get from being a military pilot. What would I recommend to do for you? Well, go with what makes the most sense for you and your life situation. There's no right or wrong path. Many times we set out to be a military pilot only to get detoured by an obscure medical waiver, gone wrong, or any number of other hurdles that come in the way for that pathway. The same can be said for the same can be said for this Part 60 141 route, right? Maybe you had a life circumstance that came up and had to scrap your plans or pivot away. Life happens, right? Ultimately, the biggest takeaway I hope you can leave with is that a career in aviation will take care of you financially, but it's important to have the end game in mind when you start out. As you've seen in this video, it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. Like always, if you like the content, subscribe to get notified when more videos drop, hit the like button, and if you're ever in need of some career vectoring, head on over to beyondthehood.com and check us out. Until then,